Okay. Now I'm just going to switch tracks pretty onto a completely different topic, which is something that really brought your work to my attention a couple of years ago, and that is you do these type walks.
Yeah.
Right. So, how did you get started in the type? How did you, first of all, what are the type walks that you do,
Okay.
and how did you get started in it?
So a type walk is, think of it as a heritage walk. I am basically your guide. There are a bunch of people around me who are following me as I walk through tiny lanes and larger roads. So far, only in Bombay, because I've only conducted type walks in Bombay. And I will talk about the typography that we encounter in these spaces. So this typography could be the name of a building, so the sign that comes in the building, the signage of a shop. It could be signage for the road itself. Things that you've always seen around you but might not have noticed. Because that's what happens with signages especially. It's only when something's not working is when you notice it. If you can't find a sign for something that you're looking for, that's when you're like, oh, where is the sign for it? But if it's there in an obvious place, you never really struggled for it. And then put all of these signs in a historic context, because some of these signs are really old. They're in front of buildings that have been around for longer than a century. And some of them are far younger, and how the signs sometimes reflect that architecture and sometimes are completely different in style. Then you also, because you're in Bombay, you have multiple scripts to work with. You definitely have Devanagari, which is used to write Marathi and Hindi on those signs, and how that can be really interesting. Sometimes you learn the pronunciation of English words properly by reading the Marathi sign. So all of it's a real experience, and no two type walks are ever the same, because sometimes some signs disappear, but also sometimes people have different questions that come up. So it really is a pretty cool experience. I enjoy doing it. It allows me to make other people excited about the subject that I truly enjoy, and that is also really fun.
And how did you even decide to start doing a type walk?
Um, so I used to walk around Bombay. I mean, I've been doing this for at least 10 years when I was in college. So I'm familiar with the South Bombay part of it, which is the old city, which has a really long history. And because I'm interested in the history in general, I went on this heritage walk conducted by Alisha Sadikot, who does a whole bunch of heritage walks across the city. And again, she makes history so much fun by talking about how a place was historically significant, but how it's also transformed over time and how it's used today. And she saw me taking pictures of all these interesting signs as we walked along her route. And we started talking, and she realized I knew a lot more about the signs than just what was written on them. And she worked with museums on various sort of activities. She worked with a whole bunch of museums and galleries in Bombay. And for one of the exhibits at the Max Muller Bhavan here in Bombay, she asked if I would conduct a type walk, because it kind of worked with the exhibit that was happening over there. And I wanted to do one, and this gave me a deadline to sort of plan one and figure it out. And that's how I did my first walk. The museum offered a free type walk to the public because they were going to pay me. And we had some ridiculous amount of people sign up for that. And then my first type walk was basically taking about 30-40 people around parts of old Bombay and talking about all these signs that I loved. And that was my first type walk that I did. And then I started doing it by myself because I realized a lot more people were interested about it.
And so I also, okay, so you talked about a sign vanishing, right? I worked with an architect once to photograph and document Art Deco buildings in Madras. And that was super fascinating because I love architecture in general, but especially I love Art Deco design itself. And of course, Bombay has a huge Art Deco culture, right?
Yeah.
So we would do a recce and then scope out these buildings, and sometimes we would end up shooting it a couple of months later, and some of the buildings would be gone. And several of the buildings that I have actually photographed have been demolished, because now they're like 80-year-old buildings that are gone, and there's the only record, probably the only proper record of that beautiful house, or a very unique window or a doorway or something like that, which would not be found anywhere else in the world, is only in the photos that I've shot, right?
Yeah.
So, which is very similar to signs.
Yeah.
So, how do you? Is there some way that you document it? Do you document it? Do you like make notes? Do you write? Are you? I know this is probably jumping the gun, but are you writing a book that you could do on these signs? Because it sounds like something I would want to look back on later on.
A book would be amazing. At this moment, I'm not writing one, but I am documenting these signs mostly with my phone. I want to do it a little bit more properly with like a proper camera, so that I can frame them and like frame the picture a lot more better. Because a lot of times my signs are like on the go. I'm walking past and I see something interesting and I whip out my phone and I take a picture of it. And yeah, I remember this one walk that I used to do a lot of times. So I was fairly familiar with the route and I knew which signs I wanted to talk about. And we came to the end of the road, and thankfully there was another sign next to it that was still there. But there were two signs next to one another, which I used to find really interesting. And I wanted to talk about one, but I had to tell them, sorry, everyone, but like I wanted to talk about a sign that was here, but now I can't because it's gone. And that's something that everyone just needs to accept. But also conversely, I'm hoping that because people come on the tight walk, and this is extremely naive of me, that they do get a bit more educated, or they start noticing these things for themselves. And because they notice this, they see the value in it. And because they see the value in it, that might fuel them towards wanting to conserve something in their neighborhood. So it might not be me, but because they see the value in it, they want to maybe document it even in their own way, so that it gets preserved in some form or the other.
So what I've when you look at photographs of old photographs of any city, right? Cityscapes, the streets, there are a number of things that clue you in. You can convert any photo to black and white and make it look old, but there are so many little signs that point towards the era, that it is the clothes, the cars, and the signs, right? The signs are just so evocative of one particular time. And that's something that I've really enjoyed seeing. Like, even as you said, just walk around and you'll spot it. So anyone who even hears about this, they'll find ways of spotting these signs. So how do people, if someone's interested in doing one of these walks with you, how do people go about it?
I've unfortunately not been able to do any this year because of quarantining, and I really don't want to speak to someone through a mask. That just feels very strange. And also, usually it's a larger crowd and all of that is difficult. But hopefully next year allows for it in some way. My Instagram handle is where I usually publicize this, and it's. I'm always amazed at how tickets sell just because of Instagram and Twitter, and that's where people sort of find me.